you all for coming this morning, and good morning. I'm so excited to see this many people here. Thank you, Cody, for that introduction, and thank you to the Creative Mornings team for inviting me. I feel really honored to be able to share my thoughts with you today. I'm also want to say thank you to my students who are here today. I'm always impressed and surprised and touched when you are voluntarily coming to listen to me, so thank you for being here at 8 in the morning. Okay, so let's get started. Can you see okay? Yes, okay, great. Okay, well, as Cody said, my name is Aggie Toppins. I'm a graphic designer, and I'm going to say design a lot today in this talk, but when I say design, that can be the creative professions. We'll put it that way. I also teach graphic design at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, where I serve as head of the art department, the Department of Art. So I think a lot about integrity and leadership, like on a daily practice. And I also think about the value of education a lot, so that's going to come up in this talk. I won't share my work with you today, but just for a little bit of background, I've been practicing for about 18 years. And most of that time was commercial. Most of it was client-based graphic design work. But today I don't do quite as much of that. I occupy an academic's role in our discipline. So most of the time I make in a social and critical way, a social or critical practice, and I write about design and often speak on themes such as this, which I would consider an ethical theme. I also talk about historical engagement a lot in our field, and I speak about teaching design quite a lot. I think that might be why I was asked to speak about honesty today, because of that role I play in our field of knowledge. Also, I really love Abraham Lincoln, and I'm going to start with a story about Abraham Lincoln. So when I was a kid, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I remember taking a trip to Cincinnati with my mom when I was maybe like 6 or 7 years old, and she took me to see this statue of Lincoln, and I remember thinking, wow, he must have been so important because this statue is so tall. Turns out, I went back to that statue when I was like 25. It's not that tall. It's not that big at all. I was just a kid, so everything seemed really, really big. And that's actually the thing that makes me interested in Lincoln today. It's not so much his tallness, or his, maybe not even so much the honesty part, but that it's possible to interpret him in so many ways, that a shift in perspective changes the story. I'll share a few Lincoln facts with you that I think embody the concept today. So I grew up learning the Lincoln that many of us learn about. Lincoln the legend, right? Lincoln the rail splitter Lincoln, Lincoln the log cabin Lincoln, the self-made man Lincoln who ascended to the highest office in the land, Lincoln who freed slaves Lincoln. It's a great story. But it's not that simple or straightforward, right? Lincoln suffered intense bouts of melancholy. He had devastating losses in his life. Some even speculate today that he suffered from clinical depression, but it's not really possible to prove that with historical evidence. But people think of him as this great, man, but he suffered quite a lot of sadness. He lost his mother and his sister when he was a child. He later lost 2 of his own children. And as a boy on the frontier, he sought knowledge, but without access to formal education, and despite his father's apparent disregard for education and cruelty. So we also think about Lincoln as this great emancipator, right? But his views on slavery changed over time. Personally, he was against it, but his politics were he had a centrist stance. And he even said at one point during the Civil War that he would have retained slavery if it meant saving the Union. Lincoln was an avid storyteller. His comedy doesn't exactly translate to modern times, but it often relied on, his punchlines were often half-truths and twists of language. We think of him as Honest Abe, but he was a master of spin. There are over 15,000 biographies on Abraham Lincoln. He's one of the most biographed people in the world. There's only a certain amount of historical evidence, though it's finite what we know about him for sure, and yet interpretations about his life are evergreen. Historians have speculated on his sexuality, his mental and physical health, whether he had syphilis or if he popped pills. Maybe he liked cats, but some people think he liked dogs. Republicans call themselves the party of Lincoln, but he's also favored by liberal intellectuals. Lincoln is remembered as a man of integrity, but he once made a political opponent cry in a debate because he was so mean to him. Lincoln was a serious and deep thinker, but he also really liked poop jokes. So there seems to be a version of him for everybody, and that's why I think he's an interesting person to think about when it comes to honesty or truth. In a mind map of association, Lincoln and the word honest are pretty close to each other, at least in my mind map. But I also think he's interesting to think about when we talk about truth. He lived at the most divisive time in our country's history, right, the Civil War. And today, our nation is again pretty divided over what seems like irreconcilable differences, right? Truth is getting a lot of attention in the media these days. Some people even call our times post-truth. If you flip through the news channels or scroll the headlines or pick up a newspaper, you'll see the word truth appear a lot. It seems to be under question again. So this question, what is truth, is not new. It's been a question that's interested people in fields of knowledge for centuries. Aristotle had questioned truth. What is truth? This is what Aristotle referred to as truth. This is how he defined it. I think it's a bit of a mouthful. To say what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false. While to say of what is that it is and what is not that it is not is true. It's a bit much. But what strikes me about this text is that it's really complicated, the way it reads, right? It's so complicated, and yet the idea is maybe too simplistic. How do we know what is? How do we know what is not? Especially now, in the kind of mediascape we live with, right? So aside from this philosophical quest for truth, sorry, getting used to the microphone, I have a question for all of you I'd like to ask you to take a few seconds to think about, which is, what do creative professionals care about when it comes to truth? Why does truth interest us? Why do we care about truth? A few seconds. I, of course, have a few options. I'm going to offer 3 approaches to how I think about truth, and as it pertains to design or the creative fields, the creative industries. That doesn't mean that these are the only ways to think about truth. I think by nature of being in front of a room with a microphone, it makes one seem like an expert, but I believe that it's really important to approach life always as a novice in some places too. So I offer this, but I know that there is more. So first, truth can be defined as verifiability. That which we can verify with facts is true. This is a scientific approach to truth. But it's not unproblematic. I'll share with you the black swan theory. So for centuries, Western civilization presumed that all swans were white, because every swan that had ever been seen was white. The Romans had an expression like a black swan, which was meant to mean the impossibility of something. So for example, an honest lawyer is like a black swan, right? But in the late 17th century, Dutch explorers went to Australia, uncharted waters at the time, and what do you think they found? Black swans. That's right. So this fact about white swans was no longer true, right? They found new knowledge that informed the structures of verifiability. And then in the 19th century, there was an honest lawyer named Abraham Lincoln. So my point here is that facts exist within a system of knowledge created by human beings. This is what makes verifiability problematic. Humans created a taxonomy of swans, and when that system proved to be wrong, so did its truths. This doesn't mean that truth is a free-for-all. It doesn't mean that there's no such thing as truth. I don't mean to suggest that with this approach to truth. I don't think that what we're seeing a lot in the media right now is, oh, that's my version of the truth, and I still believe that verifiability is a thing. It's just that the systems of knowledge on which we base truth are not as stable as we think they are. I'm going to give another example, and this one's a little bit more scientific. So, Copernicus. It was once believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and all facts led to this. Everybody believed that. But in 1543, Copernicus realized, oh, the sun is in the center. Never mind. And this changed all scientific facts. It changed the framework for science. It changed everything about it. And now we have gravity, and we're like, oh, that's why, because the sun's in the middle. So what I'm saying is that it is possible for new knowledge to come from questioning the systems on which we base truth rather than the truths themselves. It's about the system or the framework. I'm going to build on that with my second approach to truth, which is that truth can be defined as acting with integrity. To be honest is to live truthfully, or to be true is to live honestly, or to live with a moral sense of righteousness. This is an ethical approach to truth. Some people say speaking truth to power. I'm going to talk a little bit more about power in a second. But this approach combined with the first one, which is to think about systems of knowledge, it might be really interesting to people working in creative fields. I share this slide with a little bit of trepidation, but in the early 20th century, the field of design aligned itself with a project of modernism, which is a worldview based on problem solving, on progress, on the belief in improving lives. And many of you probably have heard designers or people in design-related fields refer to themselves as problem solvers, right? I'm hoping that that's something that you've experienced too. We often launch new products with the rhetoric of problem solving. We sell things based on their use value, on the benefit that they pay to people. But if we're being honest, designers don't always solve the right problems. And sometimes we cause problems. And we operate within a limited scope, a limited ethical scope. These ads are from the same company, the same multinational tech company. The one on the left was released in 1934 in Germany, and it's advertising something called punch cards, which is a pre-computer technology that allowed the Nazis to keep track of how many people were moving through concentration camps. The same company produced the ad on the right in 2010. And this is advertising a technology, a surveillance technology with the rhetoric of problem solving. It will help police respond to emergencies faster. Of course, there's a dark side to this, right? To surveillance. And it's also striking to me as somebody that thinks a lot about the history of our field, how similar these visual strategies are, right? The eye, the all-seeing eye. I share this because I think it's hard for us to remember this when we practice every day, that design is and has always been complicit with power. And that's something I think about all the time as a professor. I think it's hard for us to talk about these things, these truths, ways that design has maybe done something unethical in the past. Let's look at another example. I just shared this with my students earlier this week for a totally different reason. I guess I'm really fascinated by this map. But this is the Mercator Map projection. We've used this map for centuries. It's ubiquitous. But Where did it come from and why does it look like this? These are questions that come up a lot in the classroom. Where did that come from and why does it look like this? This map was developed in 1569 in Antwerp by a German cartographer. And it looks like this because of the social context in which it came to be. That was a social context defined by colonial expansion. That's why Europe is in the top center, and that's why the Atlantic is in the middle. That was the stage for what was playing out in the world at the time. Nothing about this is natural. Nothing about this map reflects the way the Earth is positioned in the solar system. Nothing says that's north, nothing says that's south, nothing determines that naturally. It is a cultural thing. It's a cultural design artifact produced within the framework of Western colonial power, and we still use it, unquestioningly, a lot of the times. But designers have questioned this map. I prefer this one. This is Buckminster Fuller's map. Has anyone seen this before? Head nods, yes. This is the Dymaxion Air-Ocean World Map, which I like to say it like that because I think Buckminster Fuller kind of talked like Marvin the Martian. But I like this map because it's ideologically equalizing and it's more geographically accurate than the Mercator Map. If you look at Greenland and Africa's relative size, that's more accurate on this map than it is on the Mercator Map. So it's interesting to me that even though we get caught up in the day-to-day of our field, in the daily commercial practice or in the daily any kind of practice, we still can have the option as designers and creative practitioners to reimagine the world. We have the option of refusing to comply with power, and we have the option to upset systems of knowledge. I'm gonna move into my third definition of truth. In 2017, in August 2017, Fast Company published an article titled, "Design is Inherently an Unethical Industry." So it's not pulling any punches, it's not vague. It asked questions about design's social responsibility in creating tools. And that's especially important now that so much of our field is creating tech tools, right? We create a lot of tech tools. It asked questions like, about social responsibility. So in this article, Anne Miltenberg offered the example of a crowbar. It can be used for good or evil. The question is, does that mean that this object should never have been created? And does it mean, thought experiment, does it mean that designers are responsible for every crime committed with this object? So I'm gonna quote the article here for a second. When designers are designing tools for others, this is Anne Miltenberg, a brand designer, there is always an ethical question involved. You can't create something and only want to take credit for the good and stay away from the bad. For every designer that designs a crowbar, they will be helping someone remove a pesky floorboard and someone else break into a house. A new designer will stand up and design a door strip that keeps the bad guys with crowbars out. We have to anticipate that with every tool created by man, there will be someone abusing it, and there will be someone who adjusts for the abuse. And it may sound like Miltenberg is passing the buck a little bit, but I think she makes an important point. The future of design and the things that we make is a lot more complicated than a crowbar, right? We have artificial intelligence now, and that presents some really interesting ethical challenges for designers and tech professionals and people involved with this part of our world. Miltenberg is saying that there are consequences for the things that we make and we need to anticipate them. So this is my third approach to truth, and that is that truth is a process of inquiry. Going back to the crowbar, if every design solution brings up new problems, then there's never a final solution to anything, right? There's no it. There's no getting there. Answers always lead to more questions. So truth is ever elusive that way. The emphasis on this definition, this approach to truth, is not on truth as a product or truth as an end, but truth as a process or as a means. In other words, it's the journey not the destination. This is hard to keep in mind when client dollars are involved. Deadlines feel final, but every project is a step on a path, right? That transcends, your practice transcends projects. And truth then becomes this engine in a lifetime of inquiry. This is why I believe in a college education. And this is why I believe in college and why I spend my life in college. Because it's not so much about answers. You don't learn to answer questions as much in college as you learn to find questions. And that's what's exciting to me, and that's what we need more of in the future, are people who know how to ask questions and ask more questions and then more questions. So there we go. So design is never finished. If it seems like it is, it's not. Design is always iterative and it's always relational. And I think about this as well as a person who makes design. And I hope that you don't mind my saying this, but you are never finished, right? If you are, then you're not. You're just not. I never want to be finished. I always think of my practice. I practice as a designer, my practice as a teacher. I think of that as a prototype. This is where I am right now, and I will be somewhere else later. And that's encouraging to me. Even though it's kind of frustrating sometimes, it's encouraging, I think, to think that way. So Abraham Lincoln designed something once. This is it right here. This is what he designed. It's a device that lifts boats over shoals. He's the only United States president to have a patent. But it was never manufactured. I guess maybe it wasn't the right problem for him to solve in that moment. But I like to think, I like to think that his willingness to question the way things work is what helped him move on to greater things. So in conclusion, in pursuit of truth, if we're being honest about design, let's ask ourselves continually, when I make things, do I question systems of knowledge? Do I question the framework of facts? When I practice, do I practice with integrity? Am I repeating the legacies of inequality, of coloniality, of slavery? Am I creating a crowbar? And then how might I question solutions? How might new questions arise from solutions? And what truth might I pursue next? Thank you.